Okay, so I'm hoping this is working. But everybody, my name is Matt Dickinson, and I'm going to be presenting on my cultural immersion project, my cultural immersion experience, where I connected with some of the people here in the state of Maine, the Wabanaki community, which is a Native American group, collective of a bunch of different tribes who call themselves the Wabanaki Coalition. And yeah, so I'll get started here. So my point person that I connected with um, was a friend of mine, Sierra. Here, she's a birch bark artist. She does traditional birch bark artwork, beautiful stuff, and she travels all around the country. And she sells her stuff and um, connects with other Native people and stuff like that. So she's a friend of mine, and I reached out to her, and she was the person I interviewed, and she connected with me with her community. So, yeah, that was the person. So, when I reached out to Sierra initially, she was definitely pretty hesitant, I guess, even though we're friends. I think she was feeling like it was a little bit outside of her comfort zone to talk to somebody who just about some of the cultural stuff. And and the way it ended up working out, which was great, was I said, hey, okay, what if I send you the list of questions, and then you can go through them and see how that feels and see which ones will work for you and which ones don't. And she was like, yeah, that's great. And then so we did that, and she felt like it would be fine. And so we met, and yeah, and it was good. We went through a bunch of them, and I just put some of the themes up here. And I also want to mention before I move on, just I feel like there definitely is there's an awkwardness in reaching across those cultural barriers, even when we're friends. But just to bring it out so explicitly, be like, hey, would you like to talk about your culture with me? I don't know. Maybe it's something that, but I found personally challenging, personally, definitely outside my comfort zone, and I think for her as well. So, but I think it was good. Um, so there's a few themes that came up that I just wanted to mention in this video. The first is just Sierra was mentioning that something that kept coming up throughout our interview was just the protecting of heritage, just certain traditions and ceremonies, artwork, words, language, that those things, that the idea of protecting and like creating spaces where those things could continue on into the future was really important to Sierra. And so if that, and for her, she went to Standing Rock to defend the Native people's rights out there. And she does work with different rights groups in Maine as well. So I'm from Maine, and but that was just something that kept coming up, was that there's a heritage and it feels like it needs protection, and that was part of her role, part of her feeling of her cultural identity and how she feels and where she feels what her role is there. She definitely felt like when I asked her a question about what she feels like was something she takes pride in for her culture, was just the traditions and ceremonies. She mentioned in particular just gathering certain plants with her family as something that she's done since she was a kid, and that in her in her family, that's really, really important to her, and it's something that she enjoys and that she wants that to continue on, and that brings her a lot of joy and pride in doing those things. As far as like, I asked her what was something that she felt was like a negative aspect of just being a part of Wabanaki culture. And the term I use here is cultural misappropriation, but just talking about cultural appropriation and how sometimes she feels like she has to act a certain way because she represents Native people when she's the only Native person, um, things like that, and that sometimes she feels like elements of her culture are being used in ways that she just doesn't find very helpful, and it can be really negative and bring up a lot of like really a lot of soreness and like grief around um, how certain elements, certain parts of her culture are being used and passed on in the broader culture. So that was definitely a theme as well. Um, and then for my immersion experience, I got to Sierra introduced me to, which something, it's an organization that I had known about for a little while, but the Nabizan organization, which is relatively new in the state of Maine, and it's Wabanaki organization, and they have a mission to reconnect people to the traditional cultures and also do some teaching to the general public about what Wabanaki culture is about and some integration there. So the story of Nabizan is really cool. And actually, when I was there, so I went there and I did just went for, they have these events there sometimes where they invite people from the outside, and so I got to go there, and there was a potluck and there was a little bit of a ceremony, and we walked the land and we did just checked out what was there. It was the middle of winter, so it looks a little different than the picture, but a little bit colder. But I got to meet some of the elders of the community, some of the people that had started it a few years ago. And I met the guy, Tim, who he actually was the one who he had actually a vision at some point during a ceremony that they needed to create this space, this place where they could protect their culture and pass it on to the next generation. And part of that was that there's an island, Olaman Island, on the Penobscot River, which is a sacred space for the Penobscot people, which are one of the groups of the Wabanaki. And that's a place where they would gather sacred herbs and clays for ceremonies and things like that. It's one little spot on the river, this one little island, and they had gained the rights to access that land over the years, and so as a group they would go there and collect what they needed and do their thing there, but they didn't own the land. There's something didn't feel quite like right about that, and so part of Tim's vision was to create a space there where they could have their own space, and of course that was going to be a huge hurdle because land is really expensive and right on the river is really expensive. So it kind of was just a dream for a little while. And this particular property sort of abuts the island property, and it came up for sale, but the price was just enormous, like $700,000 or $1 million or something like that. And it's actually an old horse ranch. And so it came up for sale. The Native community couldn't afford it. And so it passed on to another owner, and then it actually passed a few hands for a few years. And then finally, a group of Wabanaki came together and they decided to create this organization called Nabizan, and they were going to raise the money to try and buy this property. And so they created a video, they created a website, and they had a campaign to raise funds, and they raised the money extremely quickly, like way faster than expected, and they were able to purchase the property. So now they have their own land. It's right there that they have access to Olaman Island from, and it's really cool. It's a really cool story, and it's cool how fast they raised the money, how much support there was for Native people within the state. And yeah, it's just neat, and it's cool to see it expanding. They're doing more and more programs there. They're doing more and more ceremonies, and they're now holding some Every summer they do a big gathering of a lot of Native Americans come from all different tribes, and actually Native people from all over the world, indigenous people, come there, and yeah, it's just a big celebration of the earth and their connection and their lineages and things like that. And it's becoming sort of almost an international uh, center for this kind of stuff, but definitely for Wabanaki culture in general. So that was really cool to get there, to be there, hear some stories, and I'm really excited to get back there at some point and sort of deepen that connection there. So cool. So just a few reflections I had for counselors for counseling Native Americans after interviewing Sarah and being in Nabizin. I think the one of the perhaps the biggest thing, like with so much in counseling, it's all about developing a relationship and deepening that relationship and deepening that understanding. And so I guess just overall, I feel like in talking with Sierra that forming that relationship with the Native community is going to be really important. If you're working with Native clients, just having an understanding of what they're going through as a community, and even traditions and things like that can be really important. And what does forming a relationship look like? It doesn't necessarily mean like knowing everything about them, but just having some kind of connection to those communities is really important. So the other thing along with that is just noting that greetings, welcoming, and like the actual space that counseling is happening in is really important for Native people. I think the next thing is there is a lot. Sierra mentioned that there's a lot of stigma still, as in many communities, for those seeking help, those seeking counseling outside of the family, outside of the community. And so when that's lingering, things like greetings, a welcoming environment, a welcoming space is really critical. And going back to just developing that relationship, just having an understanding of greetings and welcoming can be really important for Native people, I think. So, and then just getting back to that cultural misappropriation, just remembering where we're, especially as, a Caucasian male, like where I might be maybe bumbling around and using Native culture in like some way that's like I'm misappropriating something there. So just being very sensitive to what I'm using from that culture. Just some reflections for myself. Just that this was pretty outside my comfort zone. Even though Sierra is a friend of mine, even though Nabizin is an organization that I wanted to get in touch with and be a part of for a while, I found it very awkward, challenging to just even reach out and be like, hey, I want to do this, or I'm working on this in this class and I want to make these connections so that I can be an effective counselor in the future. But just making that connection was hard for me. But once I made that connection, I felt like, wow, that was cool. Like it was like a big hurdle for me, but I was really happy when those conversations were starting. And I guess I was happy that the class and the project made me get out of that comfort zone, because I feel a lot more able to do that in the future now, maybe because I've kind of gone through that. The other thing was just the value of community in general for minority groups, for marginalized groups, is just seeing how effective Nabizin is at bringing all these different tribes and groups together. And all the pride that you see in the land and the buildings there, how well taken care of everything is. And I was just thinking, maybe it's a little maybe I'm dreaming a little bit, but just I feel like if I had a client who was of Native heritage and I was able to connect them with Nabizan, I feel like that would be of so much value to them to just be able to connect into that community. And that could be of huge, huge wellness value for them. So that was just a big takeaway. And this could be applied in general to um, any kind of minority cultural group. Um, Avenues for advocacy. I just feel like I know a lot better on where I can be an advocate for Native American people, and how personally, how I want to interact with um, with that community. For me, I think it's going to be look like going to more events at Newbies, and like I totally enjoyed my time there, and I want to go back, and I'm hoping to do some classes with them and just get to know people more and hear more stories, and yeah, I think that that's just one way to get my foot in the door over there and learn how to become even better of an advocate. But also I feel like just some really simple things like just donating some money and donating some time, volunteering there, and getting to know people. So I feel a lot more confident about um, those avenues for advocacy. And just the last thing I would say is that I guess I realized too how much I have to learn about um, cultural competency in general, um, how uncomfortable it is on a certain level, but how much a benefit there is, especially as a counselor, especially as somebody like I want to work with um, whoever whoever I can work with, and that means like a diversity of clients. And I just feel like I have so much to learn, but it's cool and exciting, and yeah. Anyway, so that's all. Thank you for watching, and yeah, curious to see what everyone else has. So thank you.